podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you could please do that before we get into the show, I would much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace. Peace. I'm Majestic.
My brother, Justice Rajee.
So as we're recording today, we are looking like we're on the back end of the height of it, but I wanted to start to touch base with you about the wildfires in LA, and particularly Altadena. And I'll share two things. Start off so anyone listening knows if they want to contribute. I'm going to put a link to a Google Doc that is all, primarily like black families from Altadena, and like a vetted list of like black families, especially because I think it's important that if you want to contribute to a GoFundMe or something, you can click in there and make a contribution. But the big thing was, monumental 100-mile-per-hour Santa Ana winds, which for folks that don't know a lot about Southern California and really like Southern California down into like northern Mexico, but the Santa Ana winds are these easterly winds that blow, east.
I like
down
that.
Mountains.
I like how you did that.
You know what I'm saying? And they are, can be like, 190, 80, 90, 100-mile-per-hour winds, just dry air blowing out of the Great Basin, and which makes for a really, in some ways, like a secondary wildfire season in Southern California, northern Mexico, out to Arizona and up the coast. Now, it's places. I'm in where I live in the West, and we are just in a wildfire place. Even outside of places, just like here, our wildfire season is in the dry part of the year, and pretty much after, if it's once the rains start again in like September, October, you usually have a lower risk of having fires here, even in the drier parts of the state, which are a giant desert. Once you go over the mountains, but in the hills and valleys that surround LA, that go up the coast, that all space that sometimes, especially if you've ever visited those places, and especially like coming from a cold time of the year somewhere, and you go to LA for a weekend or a couple days, you'd be like, man, I get it. I see why you might be like, hey, what kind of job could I get out here? It's 70 degrees and the air is kind of cool, and I'm going to get a beverage and I can just be outside and be comfortable, and the sunset's going to be beautiful. Like there's a lot to take in. But the fires that ravaged down those hills took it. Man, I'm trying to get the right words, but basically, laid waste to, to, at least at this point in the thing, to, the Palisades, which is like a space for those that don't know. And I'm saying this for the benefit because I'm assuming somebody assume people been places and they may never been there. So, it's sort of the space south of Malibu, north of Santa Monica and its hills and mountains, and then it, over the other side of those mountains, it goes to the valley. So if you ever watch shows, and they'll be like Sherman Oaks and some of the other places that's north of the Palisades, and then I think the heart of our conversation, Altadena, which is the sort of north of Pasadena, and their neighbors, and the really significant thing is you know there is a long history and a historic like black community that's centered in Altadena, and along the Altadena Pasadena border. You know, working class families, middle class families, probably upper class, in terms of income, you know, generational families, because it was one of the places, especially in the 50s or the 50s, 60s, 40s, 50s, 60s, that black folks could purchase a home and get around the restrictive covenants that were in so many places in Los Angeles and elsewhere. And yeah, it's a so just so I'm not the only one talking. Over like, what's your first thought? Because I got some other like points I want to share, but I don't want to just be
Right. You're gonna be like, hey, Jess, I got something I want to say. Like,
hey.
hold on, brother. I'm trying to
But
put together this cogent thought
I mean,
so I can tell y'all about the scale of the carnage. No, thank you. There's a couple thoughts I have when it comes to this. One is climate crisis, climate crisis, climate crisis.
Mhm.
Because at some point, when things start happening that didn't used to happen, now people are like, oh, remember it was like this and this time. Yeah, but you're seeing some of the most powerful fires years after each other. You're not seeing them like separate. You're seeing like, and this ain't the season. It's January. Now, it could happen anytime because it's warm, to your point.
Yeah.
But like, when you think about the other ones that happened last, 3 years ago, that were pretty bad in LA, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was during the season that people was kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, you got to be careful. Where you get 80-mile-per-hour winds, dry land, and just the perfect storm. And housing that is actually close in these forests. They're like close to these places of like a lot of foliage in essentially forest and hills, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you get this combination of things that happen. Um, Another point that I often think about is like what we think of as LA.
Mm-hmm.
And like a lot of places, there's the LA that exists on borders, and then there's the LA of like your imagination,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and the LA of your imagination is places that are in LA County, right? But places that are beyond the space that you think about when you get downtown, or you say you're in whether you say you're in South LA or the west side of the South LA or the west side of LA, which are all different things.
Yep.
Um, in that when you think about that, so just really thinking about that kind of idea of like what it means when this sprawling metropolis undergoes these challenges due to climate crisis. And then, as we normally tend to feel like black folks getting the brunt of something. But the other part is like, we don't think about the fact that there are black people outside of certain parts of LA,
Yeah.
the city of LA, right? Like there is, yes, the what's the name of the show? Issa Rae, Insecure, right? There's the insecure part of LA, right? Shout out to Inglewood, shout out to Baldwin Hills, right? Like there's that part. And then there's other parts of what we think about as LA where black people live
Mm-hmm.
in the kind of broader metro area. And those stories that are never told sometimes until something like this occurs. And, the changes in communities that happen, right? Like the community is older. Some of the people in the community, unfortunately, met a earlier fate because they were older and they wasn't leaving
Mm-hmm.
because this is what they got,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so all the things that challenge any community, but our community in particular, happened that created this thing that wipes out, I mean, cold wipes out generational wealth. To say nothing of just the pain of rebuilding, right? Which is going to be across LA thing, right? When you see some of the pictures of the Palisades and stuff that we've passed before and been around, and you think about you're just going to have to knock all that down, and you're going to have to put it somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Which I put my other hat on. Where are you going to put all this stuff?
Yeah.
Stuff that's still burning, right? Ash that is literally hazardous dust.
Yeah.
So there's a whole host of other challenges. And again, unfortunately, some of the impacts it has on our communities becomes compounded because, and also with the insurance market, again, as a consequence of everything we see with climate, you see some folks who have just chosen to forego home insurance.
Yeah. Or find out late that they just got dropped, or they
Right.
thought their policy had that, and find out that it probably doesn't really have that, or only has it under these circumstances, or you know what I mean. And you've been paying for this. You know what I mean?
Right. You've been paying under
You've been
this
paying it
premise
for
and just
50 years,
yeah.
and now they like, oh, you know what? Yeah, bro, can't help you,
Yeah.
or at least we're gonna try not to help you.
Yeah, I mean, and again, not trying to draw anything to the horrible thing that happened in New York that we talked about, but like the undergirding of this idea of the insurance world, whether it's health or home,
Mm-hmm.
and the cost therein, and in our society, the high cost or the insufficient coverage that people experience. And just thinking about I mean, just in a broader sense too, like art. Like I was reading an article about a guy who lost 5 Warhols.
Mm.
Like, you know what I mean? Like now, some will argue, will you upset with him for 5 Warhols? Regardless of your take on the art industry, those are still 5 things he purchased and thought were important,
Yeah, yeah, and,
right? And just same way, if you got 5 pieces of stuff that your child did when they was 8 and drew a butterfly and with Tim's on the butterfly,
like,
and you put a frame around it, it's important to you, right? And so just thinking about the full form of loss, but then also for communities that weren't as engaged, in communities that again are falling under the toxic brew of kind of climate and racism,
mhm.
right? And then how they have to respond. So those are some of the things that just kind of immediately come to mind.
Yeah, it was as it was happening. I mean, like I said, it's a it's a feature, not a bug, of living in these Western states, and particularly like different spaces have different um, risk windows, and like it hasn't really appreciably rained in LA for like 6 months or something, right? So the valleys and stuff. And remember a couple years ago, like it was a whole lot of rain, because we had these like atmospheric river years where it rains like a
Oh yeah, when it was raining and flooding.
yeah, and then it hasn't rained, right? So you just have all this dry land, and when the winds kick in, um, it doesn't take much, and fire is a part of the life cycle. Some of these, uninhabited, of the plants, the native plants in the region. It's a lot of other structural factors there that like I would hope for folks who don't know a lot about, or maybe at a distance to be like, well, why would they live here or live there or live next to this? And it's like, even outside of that, I know again, the human memory is short, but we don't remember. Like the reason that we have fire departments in large municipal areas is to try to prevent any fire from spreading beyond the structure that catches on fire, because fire has not more has burned down. There's this great Chicago fire,
Atlanta fire.
the
Yeah,
fire.
no, absolutely.
Like fire is still a thing that can like take out a lot of stuff if there's not a way to put the fire out. And we don't always make that association. I think like a lot of things we get detached, and this is like the aggregate human we that we're all in as a soup, not like not like you as you, but we as us kind of thing. And so when we have emergency situations, we have natural disasters, we have a flood occur, we can get into this like, well, why would you stay here or why would you build this type of place? The situation that happened with with in the Appalachians, lower Appalachians this year with the hurricane sitting over an area that it hasn't happened anytime recently. So there's no way to be prepared necessarily for something like that to occur.
And can I say something about that one in particular?
Yeah.
I think it's important about Asheville when we're talking about this idea. Asheville, as you know, was seen as a climate haven.
Yeah.
It's where people went who didn't want to deal with climate issues.
Yeah. And like I said, the mountains is like cooler, a little bit cooler than the rest of the state in the winter and the summertime and the whole bit. And, it's just artsy and, some folks, they like to go find some like, as I say, new place. And they're like, yeah, and, it's not that, you can drive down to get to an airport.
Yeah.
And then, so, this issue of the exacerbated nature and risk that our climate environment presents. And then the very unique thing here in this circumstance, and even where my big concern goes, and one, even just say like, I have, family to me that lost their home, and thinking of all the folks like that, there's which I think is a feature of our existence as Black folks, is the fear of if we lose something like this, that we're never gonna, not even just like, oh well, you've got good insurance, you get to rebuild your home, but like it's a good, like we know that it's a good chance this is never going to be like it was again. You know what I mean? Like how New Orleans is different. The Lower Ninth Ward is different in a way that it's never going to be the way it was necessarily. Before Katrina. The odds that when people are able to clear their sites and get funding to rebuild a new home, that the the people that were there are going to stay, and are they going to have where they find as you're trying to take care of yourself, you end up going like, what, too painful to go back. Even if we are rebuild our home or whatever have you, the flow of a place and flow of spaces is so, in many ways fragile. Like what makes even without a natural disaster, you could have a neighborhood that you used to know, and then some things happen, and you maybe go work somewhere else, some other family moves, and you go back there, and you're like, man, I don't know nobody on this block no more.
Right, like we were building on just around the idea of home. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
So it's my heart goes out to folks. You know what I mean? Because it's it's got to be a tremendously daunting thing. I mean, the positives though I'd like to highlight is like the seeing the different ways folks have been organizing, but setting up, get people supplies and things. Folks sharing the technical information to make sure that you don't get the runaround from your insurance, you know what I'm saying, or from whomever. You know what I mean? The predatory, get you prepared for the predatory people that's going to be pulling up trying to buy. Oh, I'll buy your land from you, or I'll do this for you. Or sign up for what they was talking about. I saw the things talking about like the people that can sign up to supposedly help you with your insurance company, who just take money off the top, but don't really do nothing else. Like they just it's a lot of wild stuff that we have, and then part of it is due to this society that we've constructed, that everything is for sale, including help and services and support.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything it's reasonable, and not like in the like, yeah, I want to get a good estimate from a contractor on what so make sure my cost estimation on rebuilding my home, if that's what I want to do, what it would look like. Not that. it's like somebody, it's like the thing that happens in New York where they have these folks that come to the site of fires and are basically fighting to be the site cleanup people and like
Yeah.
try to get you jammed up and like get you like, yeah, you want to give me $800, and you'd be like, wait, hold up. Like, what you mean I gotta give you $800? I mean, then like, yep, you gotta give me $800 or we're gonna leave your building wide open. People come steal your copper pipes. Like we got a lot of wild stuff that we as a society have like fostered, that if someone does something that's not necessarily illegal, but it's kind of a dirty pool, it's like on you, and we got to do better with that. Like that's I mean, I'm thankful to the folks that have been like kind of putting the word out. You know what I mean, watchdog, and people trying to run up the cost on like Airbnb. Well, I know Airbnb put out a joint on that folks can get places at no cost, but like people trying to put up like short term rentals, like trying to triple the price like on the low, because they know suddenly it's going to be all these people displaced. Like, we got to do better, people. We don't got to be that way to each other. You know what I mean? It's really that really kind of bums me out. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think, the part about culture, and which I think ties into what we're going to talk about next, but I think the parts about culture is like, there's charity and there's activities, right? And someone made that distinction to me today, and it was interesting for the first time. Like, what's charity and what's just an activity you do for like human wellness?
Mm-hmm.
And like every activity doesn't have to be charity. You're contributing to human wellness, right? And you don't have to set up structures for everything in the world to have activities that benefit human wellness. And so, while obviously the United Ways and the Red Crosses and all of the folks who are doing the amazing work, to your point, there's also, what do we owe each other as humans?
Yeah.
What is our covenant with each other?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And, how far does that go? And what is the collective covenant with each other when it comes to, I'm sure, somewhere like Los Angeles, where it's hard enough to find somewhere to live anyway.
Right.
And then you move hundreds of thousands of people, tell them to evacuate. I think it can be difficult to understand the scale of that.
Yeah.
To understand the scale, like what does it take to do that, and what does it take to maintain that? And again, it can be like, oh, there's a fire in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, people live in the woods, and you could draw some kind of conclusions. And then again, if you're like, oh, well, rich people live over there, and again, my thing is, a rich person's pictures, pictures from their childhood are worth the same thing as yours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. There's no difference there.
Right. If your great grandfather's hat, that he wore when he stepped off the Ellis Island or something, or the deed when they
when they bought a home, when you had to put a home in someone else's name because they couldn't buy it, right?
Like, like whatever the artifacts, that stuff, if it's gone, it's gone. It's truly devastating. And the articles and pieces too about like some of the like the architectural like the actual physical structures that were unique and interesting places and gathering places that are gone and are likely not to be back. Right.
Yeah, because you can't rebuild that stuff. I mean, I think it's tough for us to think about, but when it comes to the built environment, it's important. Some stuff you just can't build anymore. Like, we build facsimiles of stuff that exists today for a reason. Right? We build stuff that looks like a row home, but ain't a row home. Right? Like, you can't build them the same way anymore.
Yeah.
And so the psychic laws, and then again, when it comes to communities that suffer from these psychic losses, or identify and find a place where you can build community, and Altadena, at some point was up to 20% black, which I think sometimes from an East Coast perspective feels like, oh, well, it's not really black. But like, if from a West Coast perspective, it was black. Like
Yeah.
if 2 out of every 10 people, 1 out of every 5 people there is black, like that feels like that's like a black community, right? And I think when I read it I was like, oh, 18%. I was like, oh, I can't think about this like here.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
got to think about this in the context of the West Coast.
Right. Right. And then and a pocket. I mean, speaking to that, like topography, lay of the land. This is a spot that's in L.A. County. It's not a part of the city of L.A. Right. Like far as municipal oversight. But we like municipal borders and cultural borders are not the same thing, right? But that these are places that then are pockets, and then it's a significant pocket. You know what I'm saying? And then and there's um, a lot of, especially these West Coast cities, and then LA as the like super duper metropolis. Sometimes you got to think about it in terms of places that have a higher diversity. In that it's not just like a white neighborhood. You know what I mean? It's
Right, right,
needs some level of mixing. You got black folks, you got Asian communities, you got Latino communities, and then there's some sort of scale of like how much of who is where. But knowing that there was entire places where it was like nobody not white. Yeah.
right,
And then over time those things change, and it definitely, I think, is hard if you've never been to LA or you have not been to LA much. And then it's hard, like, it's like being in, if you was in Queens and not understanding like how much different parts of Queens are Queens, and like, Jamaica Bay, Sheepheads Bay, or whatever, out by Hofstra, wherever that is. You know what I mean? Like before you get to Hempstead, like like all these pockets.
yeah, yeah, Valley Street, yeah, yeah, Garden City, and all that, yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, like where it can just be suddenly just a whole bunch of different people. And you like, wait a minute, I didn't know. Like, oh yeah, it's a giant, you name it, this community that lives in this area or that area. And we're in a, I mean, I don't want to say like it's a secret, right? But like it definitely was not a place that like people from LA, in the region that had or that had some other connection would be aware of, depending on, if you're an Octavia Butler reader, like certain entertainers, artists, creatives, folks who are like from that pocket of space. But I don't blame folks for not knowing, right? Because I mean, I'm sure there's a neighborhood in other parts of the city that you're in, for most people that you may not know that, like, oh wow, there's actually that many black people live over there. Like I didn't know that. Or
right,
I mean, but it goes to me, it goes to like, the story within the story as it pertains to knowing a place and knowing about folks, right? That you can be surprised. You know what I mean? And then you got to put, like I said, I mean, I'm in Oregon, and there's definitely, I mean, it's a much different dynamic than LA. But I think sometimes I don't know if people realize how much of these Western states there are not as many. Like, there's lots of black folks in the large aggregate, but in terms of the percentage,
right,
I think people are sometimes maybe like, oh, I just sort of assumed it was, like South Side of Chicago. And it's like, no, it's not like that. It's not that deep. You know what I'm saying?
right.
And that just generally that still the majority of black folks live in, what we would call the South. But that's a demographic conversation for another day, I imagine.
Absolutely. Okay.
So, I mean, one other thing I wanted to touch on, I don't want to dwell on, but I think it's helpful in the next thing we're going to get to talking about is, the frustrating thing that when stuff like this happens is that people who politically, go to this as an opportunity to try to win points, take jabs, take swings, to credit, discredit, whatever. But the just continued degree to which regular people don't know how none of this stuff works So you don't know how fire prevention works. You don't know the layering systems of municipal authority and funding to do any of these things. The strident level of our comfortability being critical in public about something that we don't know what's happening. We don't know what we're talking about. Just I'm gonna just say it. Like people don't know what they're talking about, and they're like, "Well, they should have, it could have been," and it's like, yeah, maybe, possibly, and not say that there's not a history of malfeasance, error, and inappropriate behavior by institutional constructs of one or another. But the centering of Mayor Karen Bass as somehow like and as like at the root of some sort of problem. The I don't watch. I've stated this. I don't watch the broad network newses of the world. I try to read and use other ways to get my updates. So I don't, I have not heard on a loop the like, well, what about this? Where was this at? You know what I mean? Like, but this comfortability is as a regular person, not so much to be shocked and awed and even aghast. And so like your frustration with what you're seeing may come out in criticism of people, right? I understand that. But then really to be like, really like bought into this idea. So like, hey man, why don't you slow down and take a seat for a couple minutes? You know what I mean? Because you don't really know what you're talking about. So before you go on social media or somewhere and reshare bad information, like just let your thumb muscles take a break. You know what I mean? It's but once stuff happens, then everyone is concerned, and I'm sure there was somebody that tried to invite you to like a land planning meeting, and you ain't want to go because you had something to do that Saturday. Yeah, I mean, but they might have told you all about like what the exact what the evacuation routes was, or like when you get that first. And it is a real thing living somewhere. Like I've reminded my colleagues in my comments during my school board meeting this week. In 2020 when we had the easterly winds turn over Labor Day weekend, and although our area was spared the damage that the whole town of Detroit, Oregon, burned down. The big part in Medford and Ashland. There were places where a lot of structures in more densely populated areas caught fires, and there was, you know, we had almost a month of bad air. Like we forget that just happened here 4 years ago, and it's a similar type of wind, at the driest time of the year, and all you need is one thing to catch on fire, and it can get real hectic real fast, right? And so sometimes we're fortunate, and you just let's focus on caring for people, and a little bit less. There's plenty of time for the after action report to figure out what happened after. But while we're in the midst of it, what can we do to take care and protect people? I guess it's my ask to my everyday people, brethren and sisterin and whatnot there. So, but
Right on, brother. Right on.
which brings me to
Right.
so because in the light of this and folks making having their public kind of engagement of whether this person is competent or not competent with the incoming administration, the different presidential appointees are going through the confirmation process. And you shared a piece, is David Brooks' opinion piece, that I thought was really poignant and timely, about Pete. It's called "We Deserve," Pete Hegseth, and we've discussed the lack of trust in institutions, at different times in our dialogues, but also the importance of like the responsibilities that these different institutions hold. We've shared thoughts and discussions around people's competence, and the piece does a really good job, I think, of the first thing beat I took from it was, as folks who may be oppositional to one, I don't think that man is at all qualified to be the Secretary of Defense, and like kind of the part of the civilian command chain or even decision making chain over one of the largest militaries, like the largest military in the history of the universe or something.
Right.
But also because of the way we're engaging and in folks who maybe at least I'll say are probably closer to my politics are in they're engaging the process of being oppositional to someone like this being put into place almost from the same playbook as the people who want to put the person into place, meaning that it's about culture war politics stuff and this guy is like our kind of guy thing, and it's not centered in actually like, well, how do we make the institution that this person is responsible for centered in why they may not be good at the job. And it may be a risk and a downside decision, right? Like that was one of the big beats that I took from it. But I wanted to hear, kind of what were some of your thoughts, and I can get back at
you. Yeah, I mean, I think and David Brooks isn't like the liberal of the group,
No,
right?
it's
When it
not.
comes to the time,
just
right? Like,
just to make sure everybody knows.
yeah, like he isn't the liberal of the crew. But when I think about and it is true, there's a politic that starts to focus on like the depravity of people.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a world in which, as we built about earlier, politics is downstream from culture. As we've all become less sensitized to depravity, generally speaking, there's no accident that we're not as caught up in depravity and we're less sensitive to it in our politics.
Mm-hmm.
Because guess what? People have been, they've been desensitized to it in general. So why eventually would you not expect people to become desensitized to it in their politics?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you would like to focus on someone being above reproach in the way that you perceive it versus the way that the general public perceives it. And that's where I think we have to make a distinction. How does the general public understand depravity from that perspective? That they watch someone on television, or we've talked about many times, they've seen someone and thought about the politics of this person for 30 and sometimes almost 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
And if you come to a conclusion that multiple cases and convictions were not and have not proven to be at least a societal disqualifier for the highest office in the land, how likely do you think that using those strikes against someone will be for Secretary of Defense? So yeah, again, we can all have a lot of different perspectives on the very checkered history of the secretary nominee, right? That isn't my point. My point is, are we talking about the ability to run a military that is facing uncertain times?
Mm-hmm.
That is facing, as we've built, about a multipolar world in conflicts all across the world. And are we focusing on that? And if you want to disqualify the person, the number one disqualifier is the fact that with all those challenges, you haven't answered that and you care about someone being woke in the military. Now, that was probably enough for them to win,
Mm-hmm.
but it won't be enough to solve Ukraine, right?
Mm-hmm.
It won't be enough for if China has a conflict in the Indo-Pacific. It won't be enough. And so that's the challenge But the fact that we collectively have let culture impact our politics so downstream that we're willing to accept someone that is not qualified to do a job because they're different. And that itself is part of the failure of institutions.
Mm-hmm.
That we're now open with letting someone in to crash and do something different,
Mm-hmm.
even if something different means less actually qualified, which in a strange way is the flip side of the woke thing, right? Which is someone is less qualified to do the job because they're just different. And someone's thought is, well, if the other people have been there and it didn't work, why not try this? And that's why we deserve it. And that's why if your perspective on someone is, well, Trump's people did this, do this, and do that, that is no longer a disqualifier in the perspective of the we writ large, not the you listener. Because if you're listening to this, it's some stuff like that's probably a disqualifier.
Mm-hmm.
But in the royal we, that's no longer one. And I just think it's important for us to think about that when we think about who will be in charge of these structures and institutions, which again, people have largely shown that they're not confident in. And so, what happens when you close your eyes to what's going on in the institution? Who goes and runs it, and who does it benefit?
Yeah. I couldn't help but think about like, and even in the piece where, he starts with like bullet points around like circumstances the person in this role is going to have to deal with, and it keeps me going back to in the strange way that like culture and study of the world can point to something that's coming, but the Anthony Bourdain No Reservations episode, from like towards the middle of the first, I think it's like 2012, and he's talking to a dude like a restaurant person or somebody, I think in Turkey, and them just basically saying that the rest of the world's going more right and autocratic, and you know some of that stuff y'all talk about over there in America don't mean what you think it means no more, right? And
Mm,
it was just said, it's in the show. It wasn't bombastic. It wasn't someone who was some sort of like I don't, it wasn't someone who was necessarily like a political figure, right? But they were, looking at what people are going, what's happening in some of these countries, and the assumptions that go into what, us, like what we might think, like, well, like, and I said, we do have like the biggest military in the history of like militaries on earth, and it's complicated weapons and bombs and lots of trucks and all sorts of things. Ultimately, though, we've experienced 20 years of really, it's 2025, almost a quarter century of constant conflict in different parts of the world with our military that has not actually like stopped some of the things that they were like went out to do.
right.
Right. And so you get up to the limits of what the resources we have. You get this institution that is vitally important, right? Is the vehicle when if there is some conflagration in a part of the world, that if we say, oh, as Americans we want to go help this country in this way, it's the U.S. military that's going to go, and the question is going to be, is the person that you've put in a place to be in the civilian highest, one of the highest ranking officials in the civilian decision making process to have oversight of the military, someone who is capable of being in tune with the operational goal, like needs of the entity, or are they primarily good at restating, ideas that they think should be happening about, that are like cultural. They're not about practice. They're not about, yeah, maybe we need less, drones and more like care for soldiers. And that our veterans going to get the stuff that they need when they come back. Are we going to have substantive engagement around like what do we want our military to do, and what are things that maybe should be under some other more civilian or aid based engagement? Have we had any substantive discussion about? I don't even know to what degree we've had an update of what is the what is the actual nature of the relationship between U.S. citizens and their military and our military, right? Beyond the like sort of wrapping themselves in the flag and going like, oh, they're protecting our freedom somewhere, right? Like, where are we at with these conversations and the moving from something that can be so fraught to something more simple? There's other people being, the person that's going to be in charge of the attorney general's office is going to set the agenda for what types of crime gets priority resources to actually hold someone accountable, right? And I know some of us tend to think about crime and crime prevention and well, the criminals and people catch them and then they go to thing, but it's like we get we get crime results on the things that we spend time criming, trying to prosecute and arrest as crimes. So, and I always use it because it's always there. People that steal wages, we don't spend a lot of time going after employers who steal their employees' wages, even though it's probably one of the most insidious, terrible things someone could do. We don't. Some of it because it's hard to prove. Not that hard, but it's hard. Some of it because it's like folks are like, nah, I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about somebody carjacking me. So I want you to do all kinds of things that make me give me the sense that I am being protected from being carjacked, right? Or some other, home invasions or, whatever, you name it, things that maybe more are what folks fear versus things that are maybe more likely to happen to you, which, not to mention just the reality of hacking and people's, stealing identity. And, I've been on a 6 month, when I get weird text messages about a loan I applied for, did someone actually try to apply for a loan, or did somebody send me a message so that I would try to spend time looking into the message and end up calling somebody that then is going to try to sell me a loan, right? Like 4D chess hacking out here. It's scammy. Yeah.
I'll try to wrap my mind around that as you just building on that, man.
Like it's a lot
Like
going on.
if somebody by the phone be like, we got him. We think he's gonna call us about it, but it's our number. We tricked him.
Right.
The number that he was calling, it's us.
Right. When he goes to search for it, it's going to be us, and he's going to call because he's not going to click the link because he's smarter than that. But he's going to call us, and then we got him. Right. Then we, what I mean? Like, but this is real stuff that's happening.
No,
and then are organized sometimes by international goddamn conglomerates.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And so for me, like someone who is coming into an office like that and is telling me about their whatever their feeling of the over wokeness, and then the person externally who's like, yeah, go deal with that wokeness, and I'm like, yo, there's a person that is coordinating to send you a bogus gift card in the mail, and then they're going to coordinate that with information they've gathered from data breaches around other things around you to send you a something else that conjoins with it and try to trick you into signing up, like signing to putting their name on your deed or some other weird shit. And you worried about wokeness, dog. Like, come on, man, come on home, man. What are we talking about right now? Like, not to mention, the complicated nature between folks in a living in an oppressive system and wondering how much the state really gives a damn about you anyway, right? Like there's a lot of stuff, and the article's piece though, and I think it that hits hard for me is if folks are operating in the idea that they're oppositional to some of these people, but then the tactic that you're using to push back actually doesn't it doesn't actually speak to the world that at least is my framing, doesn't speak to the world you're trying to get us to. It just it's again, it's going like, yeah, look, he's a terrible person. He probably doesn't love his children. You don't want that person in charge, do you? And it's like, I mean, maybe I don't, but I don't know if that's actually, I mean, that's bad that person, if they're not nice to their children, but their children ain't gonna be at the job. You know what I mean?
And again, I think to the point that we've been discussing, the politics we may have may lend itself to say, hey, do you care about the children? That's important to me. And it is important. It's just insufficient.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? It is important. It's insufficient though to the idea of are you ready to defend quote unquote America from all issues internally and externally as riddled with challenges as that that quote is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But just like are you ready for a world that now feels like even though we have the biggest military, we don't have the biggest reach?
Mm-hmm.
Is that person ready to deal with that issue? And who on, if it's the Democratic side, is actually asking about that? And those are the issues that we have to deal with. And I think the indication I'm already getting for watching the hearings is like, have we learned the lesson of at least what more people than not thought was okay in a particular party?
Mm-hmm.
Like, have we, are we still on this like elitism? And I use the term elitism not as in the context of you think you're better, but these ideas that you hold, do you assume other people hold them?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And do you assume that those are the qualifying issues for a set of things?
Yeah.
And if you assume that, you could be missing, again, a culture that has long decided that those things are not the reason they like people.
Mm-hmm. They're
That's
already
the,
out.
that's the reason you like people. In the words of the esteemed bard of North Philadelphia, Larry Lane, that's what you think. Right? That's what you think. That's not what I think.
Yeah.
And so I do think from a position of, where are the global challenges, right? Like, and where are the things that as Americans we opine on, as Americans we might even call our government to do things about? Do we also connect it to having the best people in place to execute against the things that we say that we care about, right? And what's the way that you go about it? And in that way, when you don't read, when you don't think about the separate again, the various malfunctions, social malfunctions and maladaptations of the secretary nominee in this case.
Mm-hmm.
What that he's ever done makes you think he can run the most complicated army in the world that the world has ever seen.
Right.
And if he's not running it, then the question is who's running it?
Right. Uh-huh. Right. It goes to if he's there and he's a figurehead who's basically ineffective and is great for sound bites and news stories. Who is actually making sure that the checks get signed, the contracts get approved, the priorities, the grant studies get scored correctly, right? Like all of the stuff that actually goes into the operational function of a giant institution, and the person that's at the top don't really know what they're talking about. Like even if it's not their job to do, even there's like deputy chiefs and other people that actually do all that stuff, but that the person that's at the top of something like that is supposed to have a sense of like what is and isn't supposed to be happening and how close it is, like where that stuff undermines the ability to be effective in the work that's under your charge. And that's, but ain't nobody asked nobody about that yet. They asking about all this other stuff. And that's on us to me.
Right.
I mean? When you go, you go and go fight the system and, sometimes when you got to fight them, you got to get in the weeds, and it's not exciting. It's not sexy. It doesn't sound valiant. You know what I'm saying? But it's like, we need to make sure that person knows how to do them TPS reports, right? And you're like, well, the degree to which bureaucratic function directly can totally, even related to our earlier conversation, can totally derail some stability in your life because somebody was able to go and fraud a document and it was able to be accepted, and by the time someone figured out it was fraudulent, some weirdo has booted you out your crib because they're like, yeah, I'm the new landlord and I don't want tenants, so you're out of here. And you're like, wait a minute, how'd that happen? And then, but these are real things that can occur. This is where someone is like, well, why did the Defense Department pay for a $40,000 toilet? You know what I'm saying? And it's like, well, there was I had to go to the quartermaster and the other person was supposed to sign, but we haven't hired one of these. We haven't had a whatever deputy officer for this many years, and that's what's supposed to be a thing. And when so and so shut down the program for the training because they didn't like some of the content for the training, we haven't trained anyone in 2 years, and the actual operation suffers. Right. These are like the kind of things that happen, and like people be like, well, why would someone do that? I'm like, I don't know. I'm not here to solve why. I'm just letting you know it does.
Right. And it reinforces that then the institution continues not to work or work in the way you think it does, which makes you pay less attention to it. But just because you pay less attention to the institution doesn't mean the institution ceases to exist.
Right.
Right. Like there's sometimes a level of like, well, I wouldn't think about that no more, so it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the way like matter works. That's not the way science works. Like just because you stop looking at something doesn't mean the thing stop existing.
Right. It's still over there. You know what I'm saying?
It's still over there. And I think sometimes it's our personalities in the social media era where we think because we stopped thinking about something, it wasn't important anymore.
Yeah.
No, it's as important as it was the day before when you were looking at it. Your attention doesn't control that. And so, I just think for folks who are thinking about this stuff, and people are way different responses to the second Trump administration, and some people are talking about being tired, and some people are not really worked up. Some people are trying to work with the institution on shared interest, as if they really think that they know the shared interest from day to day of the commander in chief elect. But regardless of it, if you care about institutions and you care about institutions' relationship to people, you have to think about having the best people there and not the person that spoke to your immediate feeling, which again is in a very strange way the very thing that that the Hegeseth and others have railed against. Someone that speaks to your politics, not necessarily the proficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you see it now where people are, okay, it's not about if you know how to do the thing and run a very complex organization. It's about if I like you, or if it's about if you fit the bill, then that speaks to continuously eroding trust in the institutions.
So, I mean, we'll probably talk about the inauguration, and at some point we gotta chop it up about just letting the South African hang around, and just like how weird is it? Like, is this dude just gonna be hanging around the White House for the next 4 years, coming in and out of conversations with no actual official role, and like, it's so much. Like, I mean, if any administration is going to have a myriad of hangers on. I mean, I think probably in the next couple weeks, definitely go deeper on the tech, you know what I'm saying, tech industry, pop, like kind of, hey,
bending the knee,
as it were, diving in, both hands out, like, hey, I'm a chill. I had something real almost inappropriate. I was about to make a joke. I'm gonna say that for later. Like it's gonna be a wild time, and there's a definite conversation for folks to have, and I think for us to have around like, are you planning for yourself? There might be the like, getting my gas mask and safe lifeboat together, like my personal one, and then the conversation of we or us or those that are trying to, whatever things you're trying to make happen in the world that are still important, that they happen no matter who's the president, right? So what is your strategy to get that stuff to happen? or to protect it if it is happening, and to keep it off to, if there's some, due to the infrastructure bill that passed in the previous administration, and there's great work that's coming your way, and you want to make sure that your community still gets the benefits that maybe were on the table, you're gonna have to get out there and fight and figure out how you engaging with this thing. Like saying, at least for me, being like I'm tired is not, yeah, we tired. You know what I mean? Like the people still need what the people need. So what we gonna do? You know what I'm saying?
You know what? I know this for another time, but I there's something rotten in, was it Belfast? I think it might be Belfast.
Might be better.
Rotten in Belfast. I think it's Belfast. It wasn't London, but um, in the sense that, and I want to be thoughtful around people who personally feel like this, and I want to talk about the historical context of like movements that were based in activities and compelling people, and in some ways even badgering them, forcing them to the square, and dressing people down when they were not participatory.
Yeah.
That then those same leaders then go, okay, tired. and if you think about historically what happens now in other movements, when you think about the chemicals and the infiltration of organizations that took people out, and the things that happened once organizations got derailed in that capacity. For this one, mostly paid for, to then say, okay, tired, going to figure, like, well, what happens to people in the time that you got them worked up but got tired and didn't have a response to this? That doesn't have to be the response to the first administration, right? Like, it doesn't have to be what we did in 16 we have to do in 24. That probably intellectually is juvenile.
Yeah.
But you have to do something, because there's a set of things coming that were not coming on the first one. I was listening to Jared Kushner today on Invest Like the Best, a podcast. And he ain't in this run. His wife ain't in this one at all.
Yeah.
Half of the people that was there in the first one are not there. So clearly whatever you've come to do this time is different than what you came to do the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So it does stand to reason that your solution to the second time should be slightly different than your solution to the first time. And it may not mean that you have to, quote unquote, use it like we use the term fight. You may have to fight in the same way, but resist for people who we automatically know stand to get immediately harmed. And I do have to make one statement around the role and importance that people talk about of intersectionality and solidarity, that we know not just people who are from the Southern Hemisphere in South and Central America will be evicted out of America, who will be moved out of America. A lot of Africans, a lot of Southeast Asians that came through the Darien Gap and then came through Mexico will also find these things. And so it's not just this idea of, okay, this population that maybe their own community voted against it, so it's cool. You know what I mean? Like, 'cause people can have that kind of logic. Okay, well, the cousins don't want them here. Well, that's some politics that we ain't got to do with. I can't look at somebody's family and know why they fighting.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I just need to care about the people who are getting harmed. And I think it is befuddling to me while the idea of solidarity and intersectionality now seems to have all but gotten pushed to the back and traded in for brunches. And, I don't want to go too deep, but I'll stop there.
Yeah. I'm gonna just say ditto on that one for the people that know what a ditto machine is. You know what I mean? And, to be covered later in more detail. Word up. So with that, I mean, I would just say I'm gonna put a link to the piece and just encourage folks like I'd love to hear people's thoughts too though about like because it was in the first time it was very there was the optimistic idea that like we could kind of maybe sit this out for 4 years and then get him out of there and then that'd be the end of it. But he's back, so you're gonna have to come. We got to come up with a different strategy because because it ain't 2016 no more. And you know, and yeah, it's gonna be a wang dang doodle as they say. Uh, whew. I don't know. So with that, like I'll remind again, like I said, if you got something that you can spare or you feel you can give, hit that link and put some on somebody's good GoFundMe or send somebody some water or something or I don't know, just do something positive. I mean, don't be out here being on the internet talking crazy, being negative. You can keep it to yourself if you want to be negative. But besides that, you got anything else with a good order?
Nah, man, just uh, I know people don't maybe like everything that's on the television networks, like you said, Jess, but it's still just important to keep reading. And I will stop. I'll just say this in closing: just because something is legacy media doesn't make it bad. It just means it was around for a while, just like your uncle. And no matter what his economic state, you know,
Yeah,
he's still around. He has something to share, and so does legacy media.
indeed, absolutely. That's a good point. So, with that, I say peace.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to Good Brothers. Thank you to my good brother, Majestic. Good Brothers is a part of the Ask Your Oldhead podcast and all of the future creative productions that may be coming your way any minute now. You can support the podcast by listening, subscribing, liking, and sharing wherever you listen and subscribe, and by becoming a patron on Patreon. You can also search up just Justice Rajee on there and subscribe. There'll be some changes coming over there soon. But, support the podcast, share and listen and learn. I really, really mean it. If you be listening this far, like, it's research going on. I got all my scientists, all my research and development people working on this thing 24 hours a day, but it's coming. So anyway, thank you for listening and be safe. Peace.